This class is dedicated Leilu Nishmat Atana HaKadosh Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Zchuto Yagen Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Mishpachtenu Ve'al Kilatenu Ve'al Banenu Ve'al Nishotenu, all our families, our children, our wives, our grandchildren. Shakadosh Baruch Hu Yivarech Otam B'zchut Rabbi Shimon Refuah Shlema Shefa Beracha V'Atzlacha Yishuot Gdolot L'Klal Yisrael. Rabotai, this is a night of Yishuot, Mamash Kacha. And in spite of the terrible things we just heard that went on in Meron, terrible. Mamash Kacha. Maaseh Satan, like you heard what I said before. It's Mamash Maaseh Satan. Anytime anyone stands up for Torah, the Satan comes to hurt the situation. Unbelievable. But nonetheless, we would like to give shiur tonight in the honor of the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on Lag BaOmer. We should be zocheh to all the Yishuot. Now we'll tell you, this is a heavy class. I'm going to give to you what I feel is tamsit. But believe me when I tell you, tonight stands for the unbelievable Kabbalah of Klal Yisrael. The Torah Tanistar. The Torah that is not nigla, is not pshat, but it's deeper than what meets the eye. And this is the Torah of Rabbi Shimon, who brought down to this world. Rabbi Shimon, he had the ability to bring out to the world what no one before him was allowed to teach. Ad kedei kach, Rabotai, Rabbi Shimon says that he could be poter the entire world from din. He could be poter the entire world from judgment. Him alone. The whole world. So we need to understand that tonight's a very deep and a very special night. My Rebbe, who's right now in Meron, Rabbi Rabinovich Shalita at 120, he told me 2 days ago, he says, you want Yishuot? Go home on the night of Lag BaOmer, light a small oil candle, Leilu Nishmat Rabbi Shimon, and say the entire Tehillim and ask for what you want. And then he starts telling me one story after the next story, after the next story, after the next story. It was like he couldn't get them out quick enough. Of people that were over the years in all types of tzarot, and they didn't make it to Meron. I'm not talking about people that went to Israel. I'm not talking about people that sat on the kever. No. I'm talking about people that was in 11230, 11223, the zip codes you're familiar with, 08701. They were in their own home. They lit oil, Leilu Nishmat Rabbi Shimon on Lag BaOmer. They said the entire Tehillim, Leilu Nishmato. And then they asked for Yishuot, and they were mikabel Yishuot that year. Unbelievable. And he told me this again and again. And then he reminded, you're going to say it? I said, yeah, Rebbe, you're going to say the Tehillim. I said, but Rebbe, do we say Tehillim at night? He said to me, Lag BaOmer is a Chag. In Shamayim, he tells me, Lag BaOmer is as great as a Chag as Chag Pesach and Chag Shavuot. That's what he told me. That's what he told me. It's big words. He says, Lag BaOmer is kulo or. Or. There's no Laila. It's kulo or. And therefore, on Lag BaOmer, you can say the Tehillim the whole night, he told me. Of course, the next day, but tomorrow's Friday. Short day. It's not easy. But if someone wants to get a hold of this tonight, if you have Yishuot that you're gunning for, right? Everybody today, there isn't a house. This is Ikvatah de Meshicha. There isn't a house in Klal Yisrael that doesn't need Yishuot. Everybody today has Yishuot to beg for. But Hine, I gave you something. My Rebbe told me, I am telling you, alai. He says, alai. You do this, and you're going to see you short. So I shared this with you as the thank you for coming to tonight's class. So, because tonight everyone's out. You know, everyone's here, there, so many different things going on, chagigot and parties and mishnathons and then kol minei dvarim. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. But because of that, I was nervous. I thought it would be me and the kier. You know, I'd be talking to the wall tonight. So thank you for coming. I wanted to at least share with you that gem that I heard from my Rebbe. Two years ago, before COVID, Lag BaOmer, we didn't make it to Eretz Yisrael. So we had a beautiful event here in the shul. It was either 2 or 3 years ago. I'm not sure which one it was. At the end of the night, it was 2 years ago. Oh, at the end of the night, the music was over. Everyone ate. Everyone, it was beautiful. Be'emet, beautiful, beautiful Mesiba. L'chvod Rabbi Shimon. So some guys stayed back. They started cleaning up the shul, putting the chairs back. And then they were finished, they left, and I was putting my stuff away in the stender, and I was about to walk out. It was 11:45. It was late. The front door of the shul opens, and in walks a guy, 6'2", big guy, Israeli guy, big guy. And he says, Ata Rabbi? I said, Ken? He says, I'm from the restaurant that brought you the food tonight for the Seudah, for the Mesiba. I said, oh, Hazaku Baruch, thank you, the food was delicious, and thank you for sponsoring, Kol HaKavod. I said, sponsor? Sure sponsor. We didn't sponsor nothing. I came here to pick up my money. Shalem. Nobody sponsored. I said, what are you talking about? The guy that set up the whole event tonight told me that there is this restaurant that sponsored the food. He said, no, we didn't sponsor anything. You're paying me tonight or you're not leaving. That's what he told me. Very, very abrupt. I looked at him like, okay, relax. What are we talking about already? What do we owe you already? So he shows me the receipt, the bill. We owed him about $390. He wanted $400 because he says, we didn't tip the guy who brought the food. I said, okay, $400. So I said, wait 1 second. I usually keep some money in my stender. I usually have money. I keep extra money there. Tzedakah, different things, you know. So I go over to the stender, and I'm looking it through. I have no money in the stender. It was all given out. So I walk up to the guy, and I see that he starts getting angry. He starts yelling, all you guys are the same, and none of you are. I said, relax. It was a mix-up. I'll give you your money. He says, you're not leaving here without my money. I'm not letting you leave. I said, relax. I woke up to Aron Kodesh. I said, Borei Olam, I got an angry guy here who wants to rip me apart because there was a mix-up. But this Seudah was Le'ilui Nishmat, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And Rabbi Shimon says, spend on me. Rabbi Shimon says, he says, Alai, spend on me, Vani Hashalem. As Rabbi Shimon, you said, spend and I'll pay. I spent, you pay. Could you pay this guy? I said, Borei Olam, I'm boteach becha, ani somech alecha. Are you going to help me out? Because I don't know what to do with this guy. I'm telling you, listen to me guys, I'm telling you, lo kiliti ledaber. The doors of the shul open at midnight. A guy from the area, from the community, comes running in the shul out of breath. Rabbi, oh my gosh, the event's over. The event's over. Did you sell the candle? I said, Yeah, I mean, we sold the candle 2 hours ago. You know, come on. I mean, that was the crescendo. That was the pinnacle. That was the highlight of the night. I mean, that's what we do. The night of Rabbi Shimon, we make big seudah. We sing. We dance. We make siyum ala zohar. And we sell the candle like what we did tonight. He says, I can't believe it. I said, what's the matter? He says, last year, Lag BaOmer, I was in Meron, because my rabbi told me it's kedai to go. He says, I have one child, and after that, no kids for 10 years. And I'm waiting for another child for 10 years. My Rebbe told me, says that when he went out to Rabbi Shimon, you come out to Rabbi Shimon, you daven by the kever Lag BaOmer, you'll see this year. And sure enough, he says, I made a promise to Rabbi Shimon that if I have a baby this year, b'schutcha, next year Lag BaOmer, I'm going to remember to do something special for you. That was his promise. He says, today, I remembered, Rabbi, I had a baby girl this year. I said, wow, Mabruk. He says, yeah, my first was a boy. He's 10 years old. And now I have a baby girl. I said, Mazal Tov. Kiyamta ta mitzvah. Beautiful, beautiful. I said, but, he says, I remembered this morning, Lag BaOmer. I promised Rishon I'm going to do something. And I was thinking to myself, what am I going to do? And then someone mentioned to me that they sell the candle in your shul. So I came running in. I know I'm late. I said, buddy, it's Hatzot Laila. What do you mean you know you're late? I know I'm late. But now I'm lost out. What am I going to do? I said, there might be another option. He says, what do you mean? I said, we thought that the Seudah was sponsored. This was the Seudah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But it wasn't. It was a mixed up. I said, V'haraya, look at that guy. He has his hands like this. He's standing by the door. Oh boy, like the Shomer ala Delet. He's not letting nothing happen. I said, you want to sponsor the meal? Leilud Nishmat Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon's meal? He said, that's a great idea. He says, I didn't even bring that up. I thought that was definitely gone. I thought maybe the candle at least. He said, how much is the meal? I said, well, now that you're asking, $390 plus $10 tip. He said, $400? Balash. I said, yes. He put out $400, tuck, 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 tuck. I said, no, don't give it to me. Give it to him over there. He goes over, gives it to the guy. I said, Kol b'seder achshav? No. I said, Kol b'seder achshav? He leaves. The guy says, thank you, Rabbi. I feel so good that my promise from last year was mikuyam this year. I said to myself, do you understand what just happened here? You understand the hashgacha? But you don't get it, you see, because it took me for a minute to chop that this hashgacha already took a place a year ago. A year ago, Borei Olam knew that next year, Lag BaOmer, in our shul, there's going to be a mix-up. He knew that. And he knew that this 6'2" guy that looks like he's going to literally kill somebody comes walking into the shul, and he's angry as, and he's out for blood over $400. So, Borei Olam, I already prepared the refuah before the makkah. I already prepared the Yeshua before the makkah. I took this guy from America. I brought him to Israel a year ago because he didn't have kids for 10 years. To promise Rabbi Shimon, or maybe to promise Borei Olam, and there's a chut of Rabbi Shimon that if he gives him a child that year, he'll come back next year and do something special for the tzaddik, lichvodo. So he already set up last year that this guy's going to have to come do something this year at the time that I needed to be bailed out. He comes running and begging. You had to see the look on the guy's face. Begging, let me do something. I said, Tfadalo, please. Take care of that guy over there. You'll be doing me the biggest favor in the world. Look what happens. Look at the hashgacha. Yeah. If you have your eyes open and you look for it, you'll find it. And if you have your eyes closed, you'll never see it. This is the Yesod. Tonight is a night of Nisim and Niflaot. Mamash, so many people, so many stories. I'd like to do the shiur with you tonight, Rabotai. Please, if I could ask your... it's not a long shiur. It's not. It's pretty short. But it's very deep and it's beautiful. I'd like you to hear this. Leilu Nishma Rabbi Shimon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The Gemara Berachot Tav Chav Zayin Amud Bet. Gemara tells us this amazing story that many people know. It's a story about a Maaseh Talmid, a student that came to his Rebbe, Rebbe Yoshua, and he said, Rebbe, the tefillah of Arbit, is it Reshut or is it Chova? And Rebbe Yoshua answered him, it's Reshut. It's Reshut. Now guys, we know that once you do something 3 times, like the Ran and in Mukei Yosef, over there Bamakom in Berachot says, once Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves something, and they already did it 3 times, now it already becomes Me'en a Neder, and now it's Chova. But he was asking in its origination, originally, when it was Koveya, was it Reshut or Chova? Answers Rabbi Yoshua, Reshut. The same student goes over to Rabban Gamliel and he asks Rabban Gamliel the same question. Arbit, Reshut, Chova. Says Rabban Gamliel, Chova? It's an obligation to pray Arbit. The student turns around and says, Rabban Gamliel, you say it's Chova? Rabbi Yoshua said, it's Reshut. Rabban Gamliel said, what? He's cholek on me? He said Reshut? I'm going to fix him. Wait till all the Rabbanim come together to the shiur. He was Rosh HaYeshiva. Rabban Gamliel comes into the shir. He gets up to give the shiur, and he begins the shiur by turning to the student and asking him to announce the question. Is Arbit Reshut or Chova? Says Rabban Gamliel, I say it's Chova. Does anyone disagree? Anyone? Nobody says a word. Rabban Gamliel, he calls out Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua, stand up. Amad al raglecha, stand up. He doesn't call Rabbi Yoshua. Yoshua. There's a Gemara, you'll see it. Stand up. Rabbi Yoshua stands up. Says Rabban Gamliel, what do you say? He says, well, Rabban Gamliel, if you say Chova, it's Chova. Rabban Gamliel says, but they say in your name that you said that Arbit is Reshut. Yeshua was quiet. Yeshua says, I can't contradict what a living person would say. There's nothing for me to say. Rabban Gamliel left Rabbi Yoshua standing on his feet bizayon and did not give him permission to sit back down. The people start to rumble. The people start to get upset. This is not kavod talmidei chachamim. How did Rabban Gamliel leave Rabbi Yoshua standing? To the extent that they stopped the shiur. To the extent that they rebelled. And they said, this isn't the first time he did this to Rabbi Yoshua. This was actually the 3rd time in Shas. The Rabban Gamliel embarrassed Rabbi Yoshua. 3 different machloket. One was what day was Yom Kippurim. He made him come on the day that he said was Yom Kippur. Everybody knows the Gemarot. But this is already strike 3. So they said, that's it, Hajj, enough. We're taking him down. He's no longer Rosh HaYeshiva. And they demoted him. They demoted the Nasi B'Yisrael. It's unbelievable. Be'emet. You think about that, that's very powerful, that they demoted the Nasi B'Yisrael. Now who are they going to put? Who's going to be the new Rosh HaYeshiva? So they end up saying, listen, to put Rabbi Yoshua, we can't. He's the Bal Davar. He's the other side of the Machloket. He's Nogeya B'Davar. To put Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't have Yichus. He doesn't come from Yichus of good people. Ben Gerim. To put, who else are we going to put? They said, you know who? We'll put Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He has wealth. He has Chokhmah. And he has Yichus. He's the 10th generation from Ezra HaSofer. Gilgulim. We're going to put him. Elazar ben Azariah says, let me first go home and ask the boss. I'll go ask my wife. Let's see what she says first. Which, by the way, didn't work out too well. Did not work out. He went home and asked his wife, what do you think? Should I take the position Rosh HaYeshiva? And she told him, no. Which is interesting. If she's going to tell him no, then why would he ask in the first place? Good kasha. We spent a long time on this sugya, learning all the ins and outs of the ayun. But he asked her, she said no. Why not? Because the same way they put him down, one day they can put you down. The way they threw him out is the same way they can throw you out. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, okay, but still, it's kedai. Even to use kasa, this beautiful cup, for one day, to get the position for one day, such a great position, kedai, even for one day. And sure enough, it was 2 days I think he ended up happening, until Rabban Gamliel was put back. He got the position. But a nest took place. He looked very young, he was 18. And we all know, Hare ani keben shivim shana, we know from the Haggadah, many rows of white hair that ended up growing on his beard. He was 18. Hare keben shivim shana, he lived. He was a gilgul of Shemuel HaNavi. Shemuel lived until 52. He was 18, hence shivim. Hare ani keben shivim shana. Very nice, beautiful pshat. He was a gilgul. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was gilgul. Shemuel HaNavi. Shemuel lived till 52. He was 18. 52 and 18 is 70. Hare ani keben shivim shana. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. This was also a tikkun for Shemuel HaNavi, but this is not the time to speak about that. Let's go further. So he becomes Rosh HaYeshiva. What's the first thing he does? He goes and he takes the shomer away from the door of the yeshiva. Okay. They open the door. It's what we call in modern English an open door policy, right? He opens the door. Anyone that wants to come in and learn, tfadalu, come in and learn. Open for everybody. You see, because till now, Rabban Gamliel, he had a shita that only people that are toho kibaro, only they can come in and learn. Only if they're perfect, if their insides are as perfect as their outsides, they're perfect in and out, through and through, they can be accepted in yeshiva. And he had a shomer, and the shomer sat at the door, and they would examine you. And that's a great question. Did the shomer have Ruach HaKodesh? That this shomer would know if this guy's neshama is toho kibaro. I mean, who was he? He must have been like a Navi, the shomer. It's a great question, and we spoke a lot about this. But he had a shomer, and if the guy wasn't toho kibaro, he would not let him in. Go find a different yeshiva. You can't come into this yeshiva. You're not perfect. You're not from the elite. And because of that, they had only very few people in the yeshiva. How many perfect people? This was the first thing Elazar ben Azariah got rid of. He got rid of the shomer, open door policy. Now everybody can come and learn. Says the Gemara that day, they added, some say 400, some say 700 benches in the yeshiva for the influx of people to come learn. Now, I want to stop just for a minute because there's something that I just want to mention. It'll make me feel better to say it. It does not say that that day when they took the shomer away from the door, thousands of new talmidim, influx, come running into the yeshiva. It doesn't say that in the Gemara. It does not say that the moment they opened the doors and took the shomer away, that there was this unbelievable parade and crowd of thousands of new talmidim that came charging into the yeshiva. That's what it means. And that's be'emet, what ended up happening. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says they added 400 benches and 700 benches. But it doesn't tell us who came in. You learn from here a tremendous yisod when it comes to dealing with talmidim. Listen to this. A good Rebbe knows how to draw the circle and has the talmid put the dot in the middle. I'm going to say this again. A good Rebbe, when he comes to help a student, when he comes to teach a Talmud, he has to know how to not just give it over to him with clarity on a silver platter, but sometimes the Rebbe has to be klug enough to be able to make the circle and have the Talmud put the dot in the middle. Do you know Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah did? Brilliant. I want to ask you something, guys. Think about this. All these years, these students were told you're not good enough. All these years, they came banging on the doors. Let us in. We want to learn Torah. And you know what the Shomer said? You're not Toho Kibaro. Get out of here. You're not perfect. You're not elite like the rest of us. Get out of here. You're not for this yeshiva. And these kids were told year after year that they're just not good enough for learning. Do you know what happens to a kid when he's told year after year that you're not good enough for learning? Even when you finally open the door, they're no longer interested. Listen to a guy who deals with these kids, please. They're no longer interested. You burnt bridges with them. There's no reason for them to find the trust or the want or the care to even want to come back, because they were so scalded by that certain elite push away. On a kid that's really good, he just might not have had his game out yet really well. He's still working on his own bugs. He's still working on his own issues. You're right. He might not be Toho Kibaro. You're right. His insides might not be as perfect as his outsides, but he's working. And he was told no anyways. And that breaks the spirit of a Talmud. You think now you're going to open up that door and he's going to just come flocking in? What do you think? You think that he's just going to come, ah, the doors are open, woohoo, here I come. You know how much hurt, you know how much pain this kid has to overcome just to want to come back to anything that looks like a yeshiva, to any person who looks like a rabbi, to anything that resembles Torah? Do you know what psychologically they have to work through just to be able to get the courage to come back and want to give it another try? Listen to what Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah did. He was a genius. He opened the doors and he put out 700 benches. And he said, I'm announcing, Kol dichvin yeteviecho. Anyone that wants to come learn, I made your bed for you. I set your place for you. I have your chair for you. I bought you a Gemara and I put your name in it. I set up your stender for you. And it's there whenever you're ready to come back. And the message was sent. One day, 2 kids showed up. The next day, 5 kids showed up. The day after that, 10 kids showed up. Because they heard that a place was put out for them. And they, little by little, when hearing that there was something open for them, they gravitated back finally to where they were. And therefore, says the Gemara, I'm not going to tell you how many people showed up that day. Could be nobody showed up that day. But the benches were put out for them, so that one day they will. Alan, do you hear what I'm telling you? Is this a yesod? Does this tell you how to handle with our kids these days? You know how many times we deal with children that have all different types of challenges, and we tell them, in spite of all their challenges, I love you anyways. I have such an unconditional love for you. And you always have a place in this house. And the door is always open for you. And that bed and that room is always waiting for you. It's always there for you. Do you know what that means to a kid? I can't tell you enough. I can't tell you enough. We are right now, we have a Torah center that's flourishing, 50, 60 guys every night. But you know that I have another 20 kids that are wanting to come in and they have nobody to learn with. I'm telling you, I met. They have nobody to learn with. We're right now collecting money just to hire another 20 rabbis. Because we have so many kids that are begging. We want to come in and learn. We want to come in. And yeah, you're right. These kids, maybe not tochokibaro perfect. But who cares? Who cares? They want to learn. How do you think you make perfect kids? You think anyone started out perfect? The Torah goes in, the Torah cleans them up, gives them a future, puts them on their feet. I mean, that's what we said. Haborek en bo mayim. Mayim en bo. Aval nechashim va'akravim yesh. You could be sure that if that boar doesn't have mayim in it, it definitely has snakes and scorpions. The mayim is Torah. When the boar is empty with no Torah, you can guarantee that there are jukim inside this kid. No question. But how do you get rid of it? Well, you throw the kid out. You throw the kid to the snakes and scorpions. That's what you throw him to. You throw him down the boar. We got 10, 20 kids begging us. We want to come learn. We're done with the pit. We're done with the pit. We want to throw out the snakes and scorpions. Help us. It cost me $1,000 a month to get a Rebbe to learn with these kids. Give me a month to set up these kids to learn. Be'emet. If you're watching this at home, you want to send in, I'm telling you, a zechut, b'zchut Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. You're giving kids a future of life. You send in the information, 732-520-0557. Send the credit card, send whatever you want. I have a guy there working the phones, again, 732-520-0557. Throw me a month. Let me set up these kids. Let me give them a future of Torah. We're opening the doors. We're putting out the benches. We're setting up the Rebbes. We're putting out the food. And they are coming in slowly. But we need to be able to provide for them. We need to be able to give them. Give us a hand with this. Like this, b'zchut Rabbi Shimon, you'll be zocheh to dorei dorot of Yeshuot, because you're giving this kid a future, dorei dorot. Let's go right in the share. So they take the shomer away from the door. And like we said, they put out the benches. And little by little, the place filled up maleh. Rabban Gamliel he felt so terrible. I stopped this all these years. All these people, I turned them off of Torah. I'd like to sit down with a few principles and show them this Gemara. All these years, I turned these kids away from Torah. I stopped them from learning. Rabban Gamliel had Chalishut Hadat. He felt terrible. Now, Rabotai, before I go on, I want to mention something. Rabban Gamliel, the day before, was taken down, no longer Rosh HaYeshiva. Somebody was put in his place. That means someone's sitting in a seat on the upper portion of the stage of the Bet Midrash, in the Rosh HaYeshiva's chair. He was replaced, demoted, and replaced. And yet, Rabban Gamliel shows up to yeshiva the next day. He shows up the next day, and he sits down in a regular place in the yeshiva, and he learns. The Gemara says he showed up the next day, he sat in the Bet Midrash and learned. I want to ask you something. God forbid a million, chas shalom. If you know somebody that was demoted, taken his status away, taken his pride away, he was just brought down, would he show up the next day and sit in the back of the Bet Midrash? Come on. Tell you, show me one person. And that's why I wanted to point out Rabban Gamliel was 100 million% l'shem shamayim. Don't you ever try to humanize these giants by these amazing stories that Gemara tells us. Understand that we're talking here about Rabban Gamliel, Nasi of Yisrael, from the house of David HaMelech. Remember who we're talking about. He came back the next day after he was demoted, after he was stripped of his kavod and gadlut and nisiut. And he came back the next day to yeshiva, and he continued to learn. Kacha, like nothing happened. That's gadlut. Do you know anyone like that? I mean, that's gadlut. Gadlut. He looks around. And he sees that the yeshiva is starting to fill up with people. He says, oy vavoy, I stopped them from learning all these years. I stopped these people. I was wrong. Gemara says he had a chalom, he had a dream. Shamayim wanted to make him feel better. But be'emet, he was wrong. He was wrong. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was right. And the yeshiva was maleh. And the Torah was flourishing. Rabotai, with this in mind, I want to introduce you to something amazing. Says the Gemara, listen to this. Rabban Gamliel realized that he was wrong. So he goes to the house of Rabbi Yoshua and he goes to ask Mechila. He says, Rabbi, he walks into the house and he looks around and he sees that the walls of the house of Rabbi Yoshua was all black. It was black, like charcoal smoke, all over the walls of the house of Rabbi Yoshua. Rabban Gamliel comes into the house of Rabbi Yoshua and he says, Rabbi Yoshua, I didn't know that you are a blacksmith. You're probably working with coals all day, and that's why the faham, the black, is all over your walls. Yoshua says to Rabban Gamliel, faham. That's the answer. You think I'm a blacksmith? You think I'm a blacksmith? Oi to the generation that its leaders don't understand the aniyut and the poverty of Talmidei Chachamim. Unbelievable. Be'emet. We have no idea what sometimes people sacrifice to be able to learn a little bit more. And they're living in faham, be'emet. They're living in and they're doing it, l'shem shamayim, to sacrifice another year of Torah. Just give me a little bit more time. I just want to finish up my a little bit more before I go out. Those people are unbelievable. Be'emet. What does that mean? You know, it's such a funny thing. Because at the end, Rabban Gamliel asks Mechila. At first, Rabbi Yoshua says, no, he's not mochel. Then Rabban Gamliel says, lo bichvodi, not for my honor, but, you know, bichvod avi bet abba, in the kavod of David HaMelech, bet David. I said, for this, I'll forgive. And Rabbi Yoshua forgives. Rabban Gamliel comes back. They reinstate him as Rosh Yeshiva. What are they going to do with the other Rosh Yeshiva? Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. So they made a switch off. It can't be shaveh b'shaveh for many reasons. So what they ended up deciding was 3 weeks Rabban Gamliel, 1 week Rabbi Lazar. 3-to-1 ratio. Every 4th week Rabbi Lazar was Rosh Yeshiva, and the following 3 Rabban Gamliel. Interesting ratio of switch, but that is the end of the Gemara. And then the Gemara ends, and the Gemara says, by the way, do you want to know who the Talmid was? The one that came in the first place in the beginning of the story and started the whole fight and instigated the whole story? Al Yadav, this whole Maaseh took place. That Talmid was none other than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Wow. Comes the Ben Ish Chai and says, now you're telling me? Why'd you tell me the beginning of the story? Why'd you wait until the end of the story? In the beginning of the story, you kept him masked, behind a mask. Maaseh b'talmid echad. No name, nothing. At the end of the story, now you tell me who he is? Says Ben Ish Chai, yes. Because in the beginning of the story, you would ask yourself, what is he doing? He's instigating machloket in Klal Yisrael. He's instigating problems between rabbis. He goes to one rabbi and asks the halacha. Then he goes shopping it around to another rabbi. No, not Rashbi. That's not his style. So really, you're not going to understand what he's doing until you see the end of the story. Take a look at what he was really after. Take a look at the good that came al Yadav. Take a look at the incredible good that came to Klal Yisrael. All the yeshivot were open. Rebbe Lazar ben Azariah was brought to Gadlut. The yeshiva had a different realm of Talmidim. Klal Yisrael had this renaissance of Torah thanks to this story. Oh, now you see all the good that came out of this story? Now I can tell you, by the way, you know who started this whole trend of good? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was the Talmid. Now I can tell you who he is, because now you'll understand him. Psh, beautiful, 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 beautiful Ben Ish Chai. Oh, he's over there, by the way. He's found in Ben Yoyada, Bamakom, in Ben Achot. There, Chav Zayin, Chav Chet. You'll find the Ben Yoyada on this Maaseh. Rabotai, open your hearts and listen to this. The Gemara on Shabbat tells us, Kishenichnesu Rabotenu lekerem biyavne amru. They announced a terrible, scary statement. Atida shetishachach miYisrael Torah. Could you imagine that? To even say something like that. That in the future, it may come about that Klal Yisrael will have the Torah forgotten. Has v'shalom. Says the Gemara, Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Has v'shalom shetishachach Torah mipi Yisrael. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, Ki lo tishachach mipi zaro. Says Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, I'm going to be the guarantor. I guarantee you, Torah will never be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. It's amazing. He guarantees it. How does he guarantee it? How do you take a guarantee like that on your shoulders? How could you guarantee what's talui in the bechira of other people? How do you guarantee something like that? Rabotai, open your hearts. This is amazing. In the days of Kerem B'Yavne, the Nasi in Israel was Rabban Gamliel. In Kerem B'Yavne, the yeshiva over there did not let students in to learn if they weren't perfect. So in Kerem B'Yavne, Be'emet, the shita was, if you're not perfect inside and out, there's no Torah for you. You can't come in and learn. And because of this, the Torah was being forgotten. That's why in Kerem B'Yavne they announced, the way things are going, Atida Torah shetishachach mipi Yisrael. Because there was very few people learning Torah because they didn't let them. They didn't let them in the yeshiva. Kerem B'Yavne was run by Rabban Gamliel. Comes Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and says, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to break the shita of Rabban Gamliel. I'm going to be the one to undo this particular theory of Rabban Gamliel that you can only be perfect to come learn Torah. Tocho kibaro. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring him down. And when I bring him down, I'm going to bring his shita down. And by doing that, we're going to take away the shomer and open up all the yeshiva to all of Klal Yisrael. Because once Klal Yisrael is learning Torah in the masses, then I can guarantee that there's no question Torah will never be forgotten in Israel. Hey, Rabbi Shimon, how are you going to do that? How am I going to do it? Watch me. He goes up to Rabbi Yoshua and he says, Rabbi Yoshua, tell me, Arbit, is it Rishut or is it Chava? Really? Rabban Gamliel, did you hear what he said? Oh, he got the fire going. But he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly where this was going. He planted the seeds to bring about what later on became one of the greatest moments of Torah and Klal Yisrael. A renaissance of Torah that opened the open door policy to all yeshivot in Klal Yisrael. Look what he did. Amazing. And this is Rabbi Shimon's mantra. His shita. The shita Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is, even if en tocho kebaro, even if a person is not perfect inside like outside, even if he does have things he needs to change and work on, but Torah, you give him regardless. You let him in to learn. You teach him Torah. Lehefech, let the Torah clean him up. Let the Torah clean him up. Like we said before, Habor rek ve'en bo mayim. Aval nechashim ve'akravim. How do you get rid of the problems? Bring back the mayim. Bring back the Torah. It'll flush out all the problems. Start a Seder. Start learning. Start with a half an hour. Start with a Havruta. Start with a Rebbe, a Daf Yomi, something. Let it start going through you. And it's the Clorox that cleans us up. This was the Shita. Mitoch shelo lishma, ba lishma. This is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And that's how he guaranteed that Torah will never be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. And by the way, to me, that's the fire. We represent Lag BaOmer Rabbi Shimon. There's many reasons for the Madura, don't get me wrong. There was a fire around his mitah, there's many reasons. But here's another reason. Another reason. It's the Esh HaTorah. Rabbi Shimon rekindled the fire of Torah in Klal Yisrael. How? By being responsible for opening all the yeshivot to all the Talmidim to come in and learn. And he rekindled the fire in each and every one of us. So when you light that Mahadura, when you light that magnificent fire, Leilu Nishmat Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you're lighting the Esh HaTorah. Mamash kacha. It's unbelievable. What that fire represents in Klal Yisrael. That flame of Torah that will never go out. And that's what he guaranteed. He's the guarantor that the flame of Torah will never go out. Ad bi'at goel will never go out. Wow. So Rabotai, now that I just told this to you, let me end off with the fireworks now. Here's where we go. Listen to this. Rabbi Yoshua, the one that the story happened with, the one that Rabban Gamliel made him stand, the one that Rabban Gamliel went later on to ask Mechila, the one with the black walls. Rabbi Yoshua Rabotai, who is he a gilgul of? Now we're going to the other side of the shir. Now we're starting to go Lag BaOmer. We're starting to go Rashbi. We're starting to go a little bit Nistar. Says the Rama Mipano, the great Italian Mikubal, in his Sefer Gilgulei Neshamot. And again, these Mar Mekomot came from my good friend, Rabbi Daniel Gladstein. Hashem should bless him. B'tziata d'shmaya. Says the Rama Mipano, only he finds this stuff. That's why I'm so in love with Rabbi Gladstein. He's something special. Says the Rama Mipano in his Sefer Gilgulei Neshamot that Rabbi Yoshua the Gemara is Gilgul from Yoshua Kohen Gadol in the days of Navi, in the times of King Achav. You heard of that evil king, King Achav. Yoshua Kohen Gadol was thrown in the fire together with Melech Achav. And although Melech Achav was burnt, but Yoshua Kohen Gadol, his clothing was burnt, but his body was not. And miraculously, he came out alive. Many of you might know this pasuk, because at night many people say this pasuk to keep the Yetzer Hara away from your bed while you sleep. And now I can't elaborate on this point because it's a little bit beyond the scope of this share. We'll just leave it at that. But there's a very special pasuk that you say at night that saves you from all types of problems while you're sleeping and doesn't let Yetzer Hara come near you at night. Many people say this the night of Kippur especially, as not to run into any trouble that night, because we know that night especially there's big issues. Vayomer Hashem el hasatan, Yigar Hashem b'cha hasatan. You guys know this pasuk. V'yigar Hashem b'cha bocher b'Yerushalayim. Halo ze'ud musal me'esh. It's a very famous pasuk. You say this pasuk 3 times before you go to bed, and the Yetzer Hara cannot come near you while you sleep. Very special. I can't talk about this now, but let me get back to the shir. Says the Rama Mipano, this Yoshua Kohen Gadol, he was the one that was thrown into the fire. Al Yedei de Satan. He was thrown in together with King Achav. But Hashem saved him, And Hashem told his Satan, leave him alone. And because of that, only his clothing was singed, but his body was spared. And he lived. He lived. What's the Pshat, Rabotai? Listen to this sod. Mamash. It's unbelievable sod. Why was Yoshua Kohen Gadol thrown into the fire? His children, lo aleinu v'lo alechem, they went out and intermarried with Goyim. And he didn't stop them. He should have stopped them. And he couldn't stop them. And he didn't stop them. And because of that, there was a pgam. It was a pgam. Yetzer hara really jumped on this opportunity of pgam, that this great tzaddik had a small something against him. And because of that, he threw him in the fire together with Achav. But Hashem saved him to clean him because his kids intermarried. But Hashem saved him. Hashem said he's a tzaddik. He's a tzaddik. And therefore his clothing got burnt. Only his outside got burnt. His inside did not get burnt. To show his outside, his children, they got burnt. Meaning they did wrong. But him inside is tzaddik kadosh. And therefore he was saved. That was the siman of his clothing burning, but his body staying intact. Very interesting. Rabbi Yoshua of the Gemara, our story, Rabban Gamliel, is a gilgul of Yoshua Kohen Gadol, the one that was thrown in the fire. His clothing was burnt and singed, but his body, his insides were good and remained intact. So says the Rama Mipano in his Sefer Gilgulei Neshamot. Amazing. Rabotai, so let's connect the dots together, and then I'll let you go. Rabbi Yoshua from the Gemara, Gilgul of Yoshua Kohen Gadol. Yes? Who was Yoshua Kohen Gadol a Gilgul of? Says the Rama Mipano, he was a Gilgul of Haran. Do you remember Haran? The brother of Abraham Avinu. Haran. Yeah. You remember the story? Haran, the brother of Abraham Avinu. This is an amazing story. What happened with Haran? Nimrod comes, he takes Abraham Avinu, and he says to him, we're going to see now if your Hashem is going to save you. And he throws him Kibshan Ha'esh, right? Ur Kazdim, Ur, the fire. Ur Kazdim, the story that Torah doesn't mention, but we got to figure it out. The Midrash. He throws Abraham into the fire, nothing happens. Now, before he threw Abraham into the fire, Haran, Abraham's brother, was standing and watching. And he said to himself, by the way, how do I know this? Rashi over there, Bamakom, in Bereshit, Yud Aleph Chavchet, Rashi over there says, Haran thought to himself, if Abraham comes out alive, I'll go with the God of Abraham Avinu. If Abraham gets burnt, I'm going to go with Nimrod. So Haran is that guy that always cheers for the winner. You know those guys that every year they become a fan of whoever wins the World Series. You know those guys. Well, what fan are you? It depends who wins the World Series. One year he's this team, one year that. Whoever wins, I'm a fan. That was Haran. It was one of those turncoat guys. Yes. So Haran said, Abraham lives, Hashem, he's my God. Nimrod wins, Nimrod, he's the one I'm going to follow. So what happened? Abraham Avinu lives. So now Nimrod turns to Haran. No, what about you? Who do you hold like? He says, I hold like Abraham. He takes Haran and throws him in the fire. What happens? On the outside, Haran was not touched, but his insides were completely burnt to a crisp. And he died. By the way, he died. By the way, he was the first person that died al yedeh Kiddush Hashem. If you want to call that a full Kiddush Hashem, but he was lamaaseh. It was kacha kacha. I agree with you, but he was the first one that at least went through the motions of being thrown into a fire for the sake of Hashem and dying. That he was. Whether you give him credit or not, different story. But that he was. Why did he die? He said he's for Hashem. But the answer is, on the outside he was for Hashem, because he said to himself, if Abraham wins, if Nimrod wins. But on the inside, he really wasn't for Hashem, because he was ready to say that if Abraham doesn't live, I'm going with Nimrod. So there's something rotten on the inside. But on the outside, he showed a good play of loyalty to Borei Olam. Therefore, the outside was not burnt. A nes, his outsides weren't touched. It was a kivshan esh. His outsides were untouched. But his insides were burnt to a crisp because his insides were rotten. He was the guy that was, Toho was not kibaro. His insides did not reflect his outsides. Therefore, Haran had to come back like Yoshua Kohen Gadol to get a tikkun. Because this Yoshua Kohen Gadol was a tzaddik inside and outside. So when Yoshua Kohen Gadol is going to get thrown into the fire again, this time, it's Haran being thrown into the fire. Take 2. But this time, he's going to get tikkun, because this time his insides are for L'Shem Shamayim, not just his outsides. Why on the outside did his clothing burn just a little bit? That was only because of what I told you, that his children went off and intermarried. But outside of that, his insides were clean. He, Yoshua Kohen Gadol, was Toho Kibaro. Rebbe Yoshua is a gilgul of Yoshua Kohen Gadol, the one that brought tikkun to Haran. What does that mean? Rebbe Yoshua stands for the one who is a gilgul of the person that went from En Toho Kibaro, which was Haran. His insides were not like his outsides, and he ended up becoming someone who Toho is Kibaro, a great tzaddik like Yoshua Kohen Gadol. So Rebbe Yoshua, who's the gilgul of Yoshua Kohen Gadol, is the manifestation of a Jew that transitioned from En Toho Kibaro, bad insides, good insides, to finally Toho Kibaro, good insides and good outsides. If this is the case, Rabbi Yoshua had to be the one that's going to argue on Rabban Gamliel. Because Rabban Gamliel says, once the Toho is not Kibaro, you're lost. You can never come back to be good again. Rabbi Yoshua says, I'm a gilgul of somebody who was once En Toho Kibaro, he was once Haran, and then he transitioned to become Toho Kibaro, Rabbi Yoshua Kohen Gadol. And therefore, I am the antithesis of your shita. And therefore, it was Rabbi Yoshua that had to bring down Rabban Gamliel. It was through him that Rabban Gamliel's shita had to come down, because he was the gilgul of the very essence that stood against Rabban Gamliel's shita. And this is the sod. Rabban Gamliel walks into the house of Rabbi Yoshua and he says, your walls are black. Al pi Kabbalah, you know what he's telling him? I see that you're a gilgul from someone that was in the fire, and on the outside, the walls, on the outside it's black, but on the inside was good. That means that someone who once was bad on the inside and good on the outside actually transitioned to be both good and good inside and good outside. Says Rabban Gamliel, I see on you that you're the one that your life screams that my shita was wrong. I see you're the one that only the walls are bad, but the inside became good. You proved to me that someone that wasn't Toho Kibaro can still become Toho Kibaro. Now that I see that only your walls are black, but your inside became good, you proved my shita wrong. Now I ask you for mechila. Now I see I was wrong. Now I'm asking. Now I'll go back to the yeshiva, let them reinstate me, because now the shita was proven to Klal Yisrael that even En Toho Kibaro, but at the end of the day, Torah is going to cleanse whatever it is, mitoch shelo lishma, ba lishma, open the yeshivot, open the night seders, open the shuls, support Torah, bring in the kids, bring in all the people that have that thirst, that they're looking to something that's going to fill their emptiness. They need purpose in their life. They need direction. They get up in the morning, they go out to the train, they go to the city, they come back, they eat, they sit on the couch with the remote, they go to sleep, and they do the same thing over again the next day. And they do this for years until they're like literally the hamster in the wheel, running and running in circles, but they're not going anywhere. And one day it hits them. What am I doing? Where's my life going? What do I have to live for? And then they realize they have an emptiness. They come knocking on the door of the yeshiva. They come knocking on the door of the shul. I want to learn. I lost out all these years. I want another chance. I want to start a seder. Give me a chavruta. Give me a Rebbe. Let me start learning. Are you going to close the door to that guy? You know how much it took for that guy just to bring himself to your door? You grab him with two hands. You hug him. You sit him down and give him a meal. You bring in sushi. You bring in whatever it takes. You give him a Rebbe. You give him a havruta. You put him on fire. That's the fire of Rabbi Shimon. That's the madura. Kilo tishachach mipi zaro. Sofe tevot yochai. He was the guarantor. Bar yochai. That Torah will never be forgotten. Just light up a Jew. Give him a little Torah, and you'll see it'll clean his insides, and he'll shine. Thank you for listening. What a...
Unbelievable.
It was meant for Rabbi Yoshua, Dafka. Nobody else.
Not because Arbit,
Right, not because Arbit, not because this, not because he happened to be the guy that Rashbi asked the question to, Heke, just to get to the other rabbi, to make machlo. No, it wasn't that by chance here. No, Min HaShamayim, it was Gazur, that through Rabbi Yoshua, Dafka, Rabban Gamliel is going to be brought down, and the yeshivot will be opened. Lama Rabbi Yoshua? Because he's the gilgul of the person that went from en tocho kibaro to tocho kibaro. So he is the antithesis of the whole shita of Rabban Gamliel. Therefore, he has to be the one to bring him down. He's the only one that can get the yeshivot to open through him. And Rashbi knew this.
I was going to say, how do you know?
And Rashbi knew this. So he went Dafka Rabbi Yoshua and asked him, Shu, Arbit, Rishut, Chova, what is it? What is it? But it wasn't by chance. It was, Rabbi Yoshua, I'm going to ask you a question now, and through you and this question, we're going to get all the yeshivot to open up. We're going to bring to Klal Yisrael your essence, to go from En Tocho Kibaro to Tocho Kibaro.